This data is about the leader of some of the countries. I took around 100 countries and I have the name of the leader of all the countries. What's required is that I want to figure out what is the surname of each of those leaders. How do I define surname? Surname is the last word in their name. Now we have done with all my name already, so it's not that difficult. We'll do that. So what I'm going to do is, okay, let's make it a little big so that you can see the formula that I'm going to use. So what we'll do is, as we said, since I have taken this data from somewhere, let's clean and trim this, the name of the leader. So if there were any additional space or anything around, that gets cleaned up. So let's say, let's call it cleaned name. We understand the name of what it means though. It basically cleans up the non-printing characters and any additional space. Now let's find out the position of the space as we had done in my name. So we can do it with the find, not a big deal. We find the space in the name and then we take this. So we find out the space, that is 6, and then we can find out how many characters we need from the right? We can find out how many characters we need from the right. Therefore, what we will do is, like last time, we will find out characters from right that I have to extract. So what I'm going to do is that I used to take, like we did, length function, length of this minus the space, and finally the surname will be equal to right of this comma the number of characters from the right that we had figured out, and here we are having that. So as you can see, I have just repeated what I have done with my name, and let's copy this around and see how good this works. It does not work for everyone. It does not work for the president of Brazil because his name has more than 2 words. Similarly, it does not work for the prime minister of Cuba because again his name has more than 2 words. Therefore, this space that we have found out, we do not know whether this is the last space in the name. For example, if we look at the Brazilian president, the 5th position was not the last space in his name. The last space in his name would have been much further. So what we can do is, we need to actually repeat this logic a little more. So let's insert some columns and see if we can do this. So this is the first space. Now let's find out the second space. Let me call it space 2. Now here what I'll do is, I'll again use a find and we're going to find a space in this. But if I do this, I'll get the same result. I'll get the 6th again, and I'll get the 6th even for the Brazilian leader. So what's important is that I need to take this and I need to use this start number. What is the start number? I already know that in this position there is a space. So let me start from the next position. That means from the 6th position, I already know the 6th position, right? I already know in the 6th position that there was a space. Now from the 7th position, let me find out where is the next space. Now since there is no more space in Abdul Kabir, I don't get any value. I get actually an error saying that no value is there. However, if I look it for the leader from Belgium, I can find out that there is the next space is in 13th position. So because there is no further space, okay, because there is no further space in this case, what I can do is I can use a function called if error, right? I haven't talked about this function before. So I use a function called if error. What is this if error? In an if error function, we give a formula, okay? If the formula is correct, then it will answer the, if the formula gives a result, that result will be shown. However, if the formula returns an error, we might want to, whatever value I want to give, that value I can put in here. For example, if I say, if the formula gives a value, give that value, otherwise put a 0. If error does this job. So whatever I am going to do is this, I am going to change this formula now and I am going to write an if error. So if there is an error, that means there is no more space, that means the previous space was the last space. So let me put it this way. So what I am saying, see this now, if there is no further space, because I have used this formula if error, what I am saying, if error find, if it finds, it will give that value, otherwise it will put the previous value which was in the eth column, right? In the eth column, whatever is the value, that is what going to be put up. Now what I can do is I can repeat this a few times. Now I am not very sure whether we are aware of how the addressing happens. Maybe in the next video I will talk about the addressing scheme. So I will not copy the formula, but I will write a space 3. Sorry, I will put a space 3, and again I will write the similar type of a formula, if error find a space in this, and I will start searching from which, the last space position, and if there is an error, I want the last position to be saved. So here I have it again, and now let us copy it down to some more level. Of course I can copy it all the way, but let us see how much it works. So as we can see, now in case of the Prime Minister of Belgium, 13th position is the last position. In case of President of Brazil, we have the 17th position. So first is the 5th position, then is the 12th position, then is the 17th position, but then there is still a space. Now we can continue this way, but what we can do is, as we said, if we assume that there are maximum of 3 spaces in a name, in that case what we can do, let us delete this and write our formula again. So here, as we had done before, the length of the name minus the position of the last space, assuming that is the last space, that should give me the number of characters to take from the right. And if we copy it down now, you see we have got it correct for the Belgian Prime Minister. We have not got it correct, or rather we have got it correct for, yeah, we have got it correct even for the Prime Minister of Congo. But for Brazil, let's see, for a Brazil, you see we have got da Silva, but we should have got only Silva. In other words, we actually needed to put in one more column in this case. But then if we had put one more column here also, maybe for some other president or some other prime minister, it would not have been enough. So yes, we can continue giving, maybe if we assume that the maximum number of space one can have or maximum number of words one can have in one's name is 10, then we can go on with space 1, space 2, space 3, space 4, and we can find out up to 10, we can search up to 10, and then maybe we can use we can figure out how many characters from the right are we supposed to take, and then use the function. So again, just showing you what we did. First, we found out a space in the cleaned and trimmed name. We found out the space. Then we tried to find out if there is a second space. That is, we tried to search from the 7th position. That is 6 plus 1. Therefore, it is D2. We want to find the space in D2. That is, we want to find the space in Abdul Kabir. Starting from E2 plus 1. E2 is 6. 6 plus 1, 7th position. Because we already know in the 6th position we have a space. So, we start finding it from the next. So, we start finding it from the 7th position. And we used an if error. That means if we do not find any further space, if it gives you an error, then we get back whatever we had the previous value, that was the E2. And the same thing we do it here. And as we said, if we expect that there will be 10 names maximum, we continue doing this. So assuming that we have found the next space in the Fth column, that is in F2, what we are saying is we are again trying to find a space in the name of Mr. Abdul Kabir, and now we are starting it from the F2 plus 1 position, because we know the last space was in F2. So we start from F2 plus 1 position, which becomes which becomes more interesting in the case of, for example, here in this, because we know that the last space we had found in the 12th position. So we start finding it from 13th position, 12 plus 1. And if we find a space, that value will come. If we don't find a space, it will give back 12. In this case, it did find a space, another space. Therefore, I got the result 17. In this case, of course, we did not find any further space. Therefore, because of the if error, the 12 has come back here. Now, this way we can continue and get, as I said, we might have to put in more number of columns out here. Therefore, this does not seem to be a very good way of doing things. So, let us try another way. Let us try to see if we can get something better. Right? So, let me copy it into another sheet and let's make it bigger so that it's visible to all of us well. So, we just saw that what we did last time may not be a very good idea, because we don't know how many times to continue with this. So, again, let's now look at what was our challenge. Our challenge was to find out the position of the last space. Okay. So, in case of the president of Brazil, we failed to do this in 3 columns. We could not find out the position of the last space, and therefore, when we tried to extract his surname, we actually extract 2 words from the right. We defined the surname to be the last word from the right. In other words, in this case, in 3 columns, we failed to figure out what is the position of the last space. So, of course, as I said, we could have repeated this space finding spree. We had done it in 3 times, but we could have extended it more and possibly would have got the result. But then, is there an easy way of doing it or a more well-defined way of doing it? So, let's have the clean text. Again, as we said, we'll do a trim of clean of this name. Look at the color of the brackets. I must close all the brackets. Now, let's do one thing. Let's do some substitute and see what substitute am I doing. What I'm doing is, I am substituting, okay. In this, what I am substituting? I am substituting a space. Within quotes, you see there is a space, and I substituted no space. Okay, what I am doing? I am substituting the name, all the spaces in the name of Mr. Abdul Kabir with no names. With no space. I repeat again, sorry. So, what I am doing? I am looking at the name of Mr. Abdul Kabir. I am finding out the space and I am replacing it with no space. Substitute does that job, and therefore, you see the space is gone. Now, how many spaces are there? So, number of spaces can be given to me by the length of this, which has all the spaces that was there originally, minus the length of this, where we have removed all the spaces. In other words, in the name of Abdul Kabir, there is only one space. However, if we go to the Brazilian president, we have 4 spaces. I hope it makes sense. So let me look at it again. What I did in this, what I did was we substituted the name of Mr. Abdul Kabir. What did we substitute? We substitute every space with no space. Just notice how I wrote the space. Apostrophe, space, apostrophe, and no space is just 2 apostrophes together without anything in between. And therefore, when I substituted, there was no space. Now the difference in the length of number of characters here and the number of characters here is the number of space, because the space is gone in the column E. Therefore, in this case, if we count out, for example, if we count out here A, B, D, U, L 5, then space 6 and then another 5. So there are 11 characters here, but once we remove the space, there are 10 characters here. So 11 minus 10 gives me 1. So therefore, what I am doing is I am taking the length of this minus the length of this, and I get the number of spaces. So in other words, in Mr. Silver's name, there are 4 spaces. Right? There are 4 spaces. Now, in one shot, I could figure out how many spaces are there. Now, let's call it substitute spaces. Now let me do one thing. Let me substitute the last space with something which we normally do not find in the name. So let's take this, the Brazilian president's name, and let us do one thing. Let us substitute in his name a space with something that we never find in a name. For example, an asterisk. So what we are doing, we are replacing the space in his name with an asterisk, but not for all. We are going to do it only for a particular instance. And which instance? The 4th instance, that is the last instance. Because if there are 4 spaces, 4th space is the last space, and that last space is what I am replacing with an asterisk. So see what we have done. In the name of Mr. Da Silva, there was 1 space here, 1 space here, 1 space here, 1 space here. What I am doing is, I am replacing the last space, that is the 4th space, with an asterisk. Substitute allows me to do that because the last thing in the substitute, which is optional, it asks for the instance number. Which instance I want to substitute? In this case, I wanted to substitute the last instance, and the last instance will be 4, the number of spaces that was there. So the last space is now substituted by asterisk. Now let me copy this. This would be the same for all of them. So I do it for everyone here. Now why did I do this? Because now I can find out the position of last space very easily, because the last space, in the last space, wherever is the last space, I have the asterisk, and therefore I can find, this time I'll find an asterisk. I'll find an asterisk. Last time I was finding a space, but this time I'll find an asterisk, and I'll find the position of that asterisk. So as you can see, for the Brazilian president, we find out the position of the last space as 20, which we failed last time in 3 columns. So see the logic. The logic is, we first take the name, we remove all the spaces, we find the difference in their length, that tells us how many spaces were there in the name, and then what we do is, we replace the last space with something that will never appear in a name, asterisk or something like that, and then we find out the position of that asterisk. Because the asterisk is now in the last space, I find out the position of the last space, and once we have found out the position of the last space, then of course we know how many characters from right we have to take, that is the length of the original name minus this, the position of the last space, minus the position of the last space. And therefore now as you can see, we know how many characters to take from the right. So for Mr. Kabir, I take the 5 characters, while for Mr. Silva, I take 5 characters, and therefore the surname is given by right of the name and how many characters? The characters that we have found out, and that many characters from this. Now, as you can see, I don't have to now figure out how many columns of formula that I will need to write. For example, here we said if there are 10 words in the name maximum, I will have to repeat this process for space 1, space 2, space 3, space 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and somebody have an 11 character, again my formula will miss that out. I don't have to worry about that in this way of writing a formula. So in this case, what I could gather is I could do the job easily. So the challenge was, again like last time, how many characters to take from the right. If I know that, I'll get the surname, because then I can just simply use the right function. But the challenge was, how do I find out how many characters to take from the right? The solution was, find out the position of the last space. So how did we find out the position of the last space? What we did was, the problem with substitute is that substitutes a space or a asterisk or whatever, but it doesn't give me the position. On the other hand, in this case, I need the position of the last space. Substitute doesn't give me a position, find or search gives me a position. So what I did was, I took the name, removed the space, subtracted the length from this, figured out how many spaces are there. Since substitute allows me that, I substituted the last space. For example, here I substituted in his name a space with asterisk, but not all. I did it for the instance 4, that is the last space. So the last space got replaced with an asterisk. Now using a find, I can find out the position of the asterisk, and the position of the asterisk basically tells me what is the position of the last space, and therefore the job gets done. So if you practice this out, I'm sure you will be able to figure out what we did. Is this the best way? May not be. There is another interesting way of doing that, but maybe we'll talk about it sometime later, maybe in another occasion, some other time. But so that's what we plan for today. I understand some of you might say, why take all this trouble? We could have done it in text to column and so on and so forth. The two reasons. One, text to column, if we had done, we would not have got a single column like we had got here. Okay, we would not have got a single column like we have got here, where we get all the surnames. If we had used the autofill feature of Excel, if now somebody comes and changes the name, for example, forgive my doing so, but if we have another prime minister in Afghanistan, just for the sake of it, and his name happens to be Muhammad Abdul Kabir, in that case, an autofill feature of Excel won't have changed it directly. Again, one have to come to this column and do it. But in this case, because we are talking of making a model, moment I changed it here, as you can see, it has number of spaces. Initially it was 1, now it has become 2, and it still got Kabir right. And if we have something other surname here, for example, for anything better, let me just put XYZ, then you can see it automatically comes in it. So the advantage of using the formula and functions like we did, it becomes reusable. That means once this is made, somebody who doesn't know all these formulas, functions that we have used, but just comes in here and puts in the new names of the world leaders, will still have their surnames automatically calculated. So yes, there are other ways of handling them. They might have certain positives, certain negatives. I'm not saying this is the best way of doing it, but what I'm trying to put in here is this. This is what we are doing using functions and formulas, because we want to create a model. The idea of creating a model is that change the data, the results will automatically change based on what we have done. We don't have to know how to do it. We don't have to drag anything. We don't have to do anything new. Automatically that thing should come up. So even a lay person can change the name of the leaders and will get the right surname because of the formula that we have used at this point. So therefore, in this channel, we are looking specifically at making models. That means do some computations based on which later on somebody can use it. A lay person can also use it, who don't have to know anything about Excel except for maybe typing in the new data or filling in the new data. So that's what the intention for today was. Again, as always, keep learning.